Salvete. This week in Chapter 3, we'll learn more about verbs. We've seen that compared to English, Latin verbs are sometimes like 3 words in one. In other words, when you translate a Latin verb, you translate it into a phrase. Let's look at some examples of how this works with verbs. For one thing, the Latin verb has an ending on it that implies a pronoun, whereas in English, we must state the pronoun out loud. Also in English, we express the present tense, often with helping verbs. But in Latin, there is only this one form of the present tense, the one that you learned to form in Chapter 1. So this means that often when we translate a Latin verb into English, we need to add helping verbs like do or were, are. But in Latin, these helping verbs were not used, and so when you need to translate a phrase like they are calling from English into Latin, you do not translate the word are in this context. Only when that word is used as a linking verb do you translate it into Latin. But when it's a helping verb, like it is here in these phrases, then that is not translated into Latin. So all of this causes us to have less words in a Latin sentence than we do in an English sentence. The other thing that you'll be learning here in this chapter are what the 4 principal parts are all about. In every language, we have principal parts of verbs. These are the various forms of the verbs that should be memorized in order to know the spellings that you will use for stems to form all of the different tenses of the verb, etc. The first form in this verb to love, amo, is the first person singular present tense. The second form that you'll memorize is going to be the infinitive. So whenever you memorize a set of verbs, the second one in the list will be the infinitive, which expresses the basic concept of the verb. In English, we put the little word to in front of the verb to make the infinitive, but in Latin, they have the ending re on it. The third form is the first person singular form of the perfect tense, which is a past tense, a simple past tense in Latin. And so the third principal part of this verb means I loved. And the fourth principal part is the participle form. And usually it will be listed as the perfect passive participle form. And so amatum means having been loved. Every once in a while, a verb will have a different participle form, like a future participle, or sometimes it doesn't even list a fourth principal part, and that's simply because the meaning of that verb caused it not to be used in participle form. Before we get into practice, let's review the vocabulary here. The first verb to memorize this week is clamo, clamare, clamavi, clamatum. To shout. Clamo, clamare, clamavi, clamatum. To shout. The second one means to pray. Oro, orare, oravi, oratum. And then we have indico, indicare, indicavi, indicatum. To indicate or point at. Servo, servare, servavi, servatum. To save or to guard, or to keep, save or guard. Porto, portare, portavi, portatum. To carry. And then two little adverbs, sepe and semper. Sepe means often, semper always. Most of these will be very easy for you to remember. For example, porto, portare, to carry. Just think of the English derivatives we get from this one. Portable, able to be carried. Or transport, to carry across. And then the first one, look up at clamo, clamare, clamavi, clamatum. Think about one of the types of sentences that you learn in English grammar. Exclamation. Exclamat. That is a Latin verb. Exclamat means to shout out. He shouts out, or it shouts out. So X on the front of this simply makes it say X. Means the little prefix X is actually a preposition in Latin that means out. And so that will help you remember the meaning of this verb. So now turn to the next page. Let's review how to conjugate, just to make sure that you have this down. The verb to shout, clamo, clamare, clamavi, clamatum. The infinitive is found in the second principal part, clamare. So look at the infinitive, drop the RE, and then you have the stem clama, C-L-A-M-A. Now you simply add the personal endings to it. Make sure that you have these personal endings memorized. O-S-T, mustus, nt. O-S-T, mustus, nt. Now, don't forget the A flies away from the O. So once you put these together, the present tense of the verb to shout is clamo, clamas, clamat, clamamus, clamatus, clamant. Now it's your turn to practice. Look at the practicum, fill in the four principal parts of the following verb, and then conjugate. Now you should pause the recording and see what you can do, and then once you start it up again, you'll see the answers worked out for you on the board. Now let's practice reviewing what each of these forms mean. Clamas means you shout, oras, you pray, oramus, we pray, vocant, they call, clamatus, you plural, shout, indicamus, we indicate or we point at, laudamus, we praise, portant, they carry.